Capitalism has been the Janus of modern society, yielding great benefits as well as detriments to the world. While industry and commerce reached never-before-seen heights due to its developments, it had also been the great harbinger of corruption and destruction, which would be exposed to the world at large in one catastrophic failure after another. But while there are a lot of catastrophic failures to talk about that expose corruption present in a capitalist society, one that is often overlooked happened in perhaps an unexpected place, in the 1990s department store in Seoul, South Korea. Korea in the 1990s was in an economic boom, never before seen in the history of the peninsula. Unemployment was low, stocks were rising, and new industries and factories and stores were propped up on every street corner. And it was also a time of political and social liberalization. Ever since 1987, when the military dictatorship was ousted in favor of a democratically elected government, people were granted new rights and privileges. What was once called seditious music and clothes that were considered too Western in the eyes of the conservative dictatorship now became in vogue amongst the population. And for Koreans emerging from the serfdom of the Japanese colonial age, the horrors of the Civil War, and the despotism of the Ri, Park, and Chun dictators, the 1990s were a time of unprecedented freedom and prosperity. And what perhaps best characterized the new prosperous Korea would be the Sampoong department store, located in Seocho-gu, which opened its doors in December of 1989. It was the second largest department store in the country, but undoubtedly the most luxurious. It was filled with designer brands Koreans had never even heard of before, like Chanel, Dior, Ferragamo, Versace, Gucci, Burberry, and others. Celebrities frequented the bookstores and restaurants in the store. Movie stars bought memberships for the sports club on the top floor, and visitors marveled at the spacious gardens in the central atrium and the luxury of the interior. For over 5 years, the store had maintained its reputation with a steady stream of customers and a steady stream of profits. The CEO, Lee Jun, became one of the most successful businessmen in the country and a member of the famed chaebols in Korea. The good times were rolling, and it seemed like it would go on. It did not. On June 29, 1995, 5:57 p.m., the Sampoong department store would collapse. Starting from the top floor balcony, each of the floors would fall down on top of one another in a domino effect, with hundreds of tons of concrete slabs and steel beams crashing down with tremendous force and speed. The walls, unable to cope with such a massive burden, would collapse as well along with the floors. In the span of just 30-odd seconds, Sampoong would be reduced to rubble. The nearby streets would be littered with concrete and glass, and the dust cloud generated from the collapse would spread out all across the city, filling up the streets with a thick layer of dust and debris. Rescue missions for the victims of the collapse began almost immediately, though the process was rife with inefficiency and incompetence. There was bickering between the fire department and police department and the Seoul Metropolitan Council regarding who had central command over the rescue efforts, and lack of proper equipment such as firewater and hydraulic rescue cutters meant that the rescue efforts would progress at a slow pace. Furthermore, the lack of proper protocol also meant that the bodies of the victims would be haphazardly dealt with some of the bodies being thrown away into the nearby landfill. The collapse killed over 502 people, the single largest loss of life in Korea since the Korean War. 937 would be wounded, and 6 would be classified as missing, their bodies too mutilated and damaged for identification. People were shocked, saddened, angered, and they all demanded for answers and responsibility. What they got in return was an expose of the corruption and materialism present in their society. Lee Jun, the CEO and owner of the Sampoong Corporation, was a former army officer and an agent of the Korean Central Intelligence Service, where he built friendships and connections with the top brass in the military and politics. He made money in the 60s and 70s building apartments and trading real estate during the construction boom of Gangnam, getting his building permits and land grants by asking favors from his military and politician friends, and bribing officials in charge of housing development and urban planning to close lucrative deals. By the 1980s, he was one of the most successful real estate developers in Korea. Lee's greatest construction project would be the one to launch him into national fame, the Sampoong department store, which he envisioned would be a commercial hub to lure in wealthy customers. The process in building and maintaining his flagship store was through corruption. In order to cut costs for construction, Lee had the pillars designed to support the floors of the department store be shaved to save the concrete. Many of the pillars, designed to have a diameter of 32 inches, were cut down so that they were 23 inches wide. Lee, greedy for money and profits, would even illegally extend the department store so that there was 5 floors instead of 4, and on the 5th floor he would add in luxury restaurants and a swimming pool, adding more stress to the already overburdened pillars of the building. And the central cause of the collapse on June 29th was caused by another attempt to cut costs on maintenance and repair. 2 years after the opening of the store, the cooling towers on the rooftop had to be moved to the other side of the building after local complaints regarding the noise from the structures. And while construction protocol meant that these cooling towers had to be moved via cranes, Lee ordered that they be moved via attaching wheels to the bottom and pushing them across. The resultant vibration and stress from the 3 15-ton towers being dragged across the rooftop caused further damage to the pillars on the building. On the day of the collapse, employees in the store noticed large cracks on the 5th floor ceiling at 3 p.m. and requested to evacuate the customers inside the building. But Lee would refuse, saying that an evacuation would hurt sales. He would also avoid any responsibility or remorse for the disaster. In an interview made to the press 2 days after the collapse, Lee stated to the reporters that his main concern was that the disaster not only harmed the customers, but that it caused great financial damage to his company. Lee would eventually be charged with criminal negligence and be sentenced to 7 years in prison. His company and his assets would be seized and be used to provide compensation to the victims of the disasters, and he would die penniless and alone in 2003. 20-odd years since the disaster, Sampoong would remain as the epitome of the dangers of corporate corruption and corporate negligence in a modern society. For it was an incident far bigger than that of the Enron scandal or the WorldCom scandal, because hundreds of human lives, incalculable in monetary terms, were lost in its wake. Governments should watch over corporations and business firms with justice and vigilance to prevent these incidents from happening. But in a time where such virtues are all too often forgotten, we cannot say with certainty that Sampoong and its legacy will not rear its ugly head in the time to come. We can only wait and see.